Do you hear us? Okay. وإن شاء الله زملائنا اللي على القهوة والشاي ممكن يجوا ينضموا إلنا شوي شوي. مرحبا فيكم، برحب فيكم في الجلسة الختامية لليوم الثالث من مؤتمرنا. هذه الجلسة رح تكون باللغة الإنجليزية، بس رح أعطي مقدمة صغيرة باللغة العربية وبعدين رح نحول الجلسة للغة الإنجليزية. فأي شخص محتاج ترجمة من الإنجليزي للعربي، الهيدسيتس موجودين والترجمة موجودة، ف بليز جهزوا حالكم. طيب، بشرفني فعلا أن أستضيف في هذه الجلسة 4 متحدثين ومتحدثات متميزين، هن أصدقاء المجلس ويعملون معنا من فترة طويلة في مشاريع مختلفة وعلى مستوى مؤسساتي أيضا. فالجلسة حول إمكانيات تفكيك الموروثات الكولونيالية للمعرفة وإعادة بناء النظريات من مواقع مختلفة في الجنوب الشمالي. وهي الجلسة بتعكس اهتمام المجلس العربي للعلوم الاجتماعية في العمل عبر القارات وعبر مناطق الجنوب. فصحيح إنه إحنا مجلس مهتمين بالمنطقة العربية بشكل أساسي، مهتمين بالتشبيك والعمل الفكري داخل هاي المنطقة، ولكن لا ننظر إلى هاي المنطقة كمنطقة مغلقة ومعزولة عن باقي العالم، وإنما كجزء من يعني جزء طبعاً اقتصادياً وسياسياً وبأشكال أخرى، بس أيضاً جزء فكرياً من العالم، وخاصة ما يسمى بالجنوب العالمي، مع أنه طبعاً هذا كمان موضوع الجلسة، أنه ماذا نقصد بالجنوب وماذا نقصد بالجنوب العالمي. ف يعني بعض الأفكار من طرفي بعد ما قبل ما أحول الكلام للزملاء، إنه التنظير من الجنوب يجب أن يأخذ في الحسبان تموضعنا الفكري طويل الأمد الذي عرفناه بالشرق المتعلق بالغرب. يعني عندما نفكر بأنفسنا كمنطقة عربية كجنوب، ماذا يعني ذلك؟ لأنه تراثنا الفكري بموضعنا كشرق وليس كجنوب، والشرق بعلاقة مع غرب مهيمن. فالتفكير كجنوب يحتاج إلى تفكيك ليس فقط الفكر الكولونيالي والغربي، وإنما الفكر العربي الذي ينظر إلى نفسه كشرق وليس كجنوب. فالتحول من التفكير في أنفسنا على أننا شرق إلى أننا جنوب ليس بالأمر البسيط، وله آثار عديدة من حيث المحطات التاريخية التي نتذكرها، الطريقة التي نموضع بها أنفسنا في العالم اليوم، والتحالفات الفكرية والجيوسياسية التي نسعى إليها. هذه بعض الأسئلة التي ستتناولها هذه الجلسة الرئيسية. المتحدث الأول معنا هو الدكتور جودوين مورونغا، جودوين صديق وأمين الأمين التنفيذي السابع لمجلس تنمية بحوث العلوم الاجتماعية في أفريقيا كوداسريا، مقر كوداسريا في السنغال. وطبعا في علاقة وطيدة بين المنطقة العربية وكوداسريا، لأنه من مؤسسي كوداسريا هو سمير أمين العالم العربي المصري المعروف، وهو أيضا زميل باحث رئيسي في معهد دراسات التنمية في جامعة نيروبي، ومع أنه يعمل في كوداسريا بإجازة غياب. وكوداسريا منظمة بحثية غير حكومية مستقلة لعموم أفريقيا، تأسست عام 1973 من قبل باحثين أفارقة، ويتركز عملها حول بناء مجتمع بحثي قوي وحيوي في العلوم الاجتماعية والإنسانية في أفريقيا. وتعمل كوداسريا على حشد فهم أكبر للتحديات التي تواجه أفريقيا والعالم من أجل التغلب على هذه التحديات. ولتحقيق ذلك تدعم كوداسريا بحوث العلوم الاجتماعية والإنسانية من قبل العلماء في أفريقيا والشتات الأفريقي في جميع أنحاء العالم من خلال مجموعة متنوعة من البرامج. المتحدثة الثانية هي أيضا صديقة وزميلة الدكتورة كارينا باتياني، التي ستنضم إلينا عبر منصة الزوم للأسف لأنها لم تتمكن من الحضور شخصيا إلى بيروت. وكارينا هي السكرتيرة التنفيذية لمجلس العلوم الاجتماعية لأمريكا اللاتينية كلاكسو، وهي أستاذة وباحثة في كلية العلوم الاجتماعية في جامعة جمهورية أوروغواي. وكلاكسو مؤسسة دولية غير حكومية تتمتع بمركز ارتباطي مع اليونسكو، تم إنشائها عام 1967، وتضم حالياً أكثر من 880 مركز للبحوث والدراسات العليا في مجال العلوم الاجتماعية والإنسانية في 56 دولة في أمريكا اللاتينية والقارات الأخرى. وتتمثل أهداف كلاكسو في تعزيز وتطوير البحث وتدريس العلوم الاجتماعية، وتعزيز التبادل والتعاون بين المؤسسات والباحثين داخل المنطقة وخارجها، والنشر الكافي للمعرفة التي ينتجها علماء العلوم الاجتماعية بين القوى والحركات الاجتماعية ومنظمات المجتمع المدني. يلي كارينا الدكتور دريس كسيكس من HOM LCI في المغرب، وهو عضو لجنة اختيار برنامج البحوث حول الفنون وعضو اللجنة المنظمة للمؤتمر. هذا بالنسبة علاقته معنا. ودريس كاتب وروائي وكاتب مسرحي وباحث، وهو أستاذ في المنهجية والكتابة الإبداعية ومدير مركز إيكونوميا للبحث في العلوم الاجتماعية والاقتصادية والتربوية في الرباط. وأيضاً معنا الدكتور فادي بردويل من جامعة ديوك، أيضاً عضو اللجنة المنظمة للمؤتمر والذي سيكون المناقش في هذه الجلسة. والدكتور فادي بردويل أستاذ أنثروبولوجيا ودراسات شرق أوسطية في جامعة ديوك، ويعمل على الفكر والإرث الفكري في المنطقة العربية. إذن المتحدثين الأربعة، وسنبدأ مع الدكتور جودوين. To switch to English, so I just introduced our speakers, and I just gave a few sort of ideas to which perhaps Fadi will follow up on if he finds them interesting. But one of the things that has been interesting me in the idea of, or the approach about theorizing from the South, from our position, especially here in Lebanon and in the Mashriq of the Arab region, is how the switch from thinking of ourselves as East to thinking about ourselves as South, what are the implications of this switch in thinking, and how does it make us think differently about our intellectual traditions, especially in the social sciences and the humanities. However, now, of course, we want to listen to our speakers and benefit from your ideas and from your approaches to the idea of theorizing from the South, including critiquing the idea of South, if you wish, critiquing theorizing. The title of the session is open to critique in every respect. So we will start with Goodwin, and then Karina, and then Dries, and then Fadi will be the discussants. So 15 minutes for each of the speakers. And it's very difficult for me to stop any of you on Zoom or on the other tables. So I hope that you will self-regulate your time management. Goodwin, please.
Thank you very much. I think that it is a dream of any person speaking in a panel like this to have the chair tell you to self-regulate. Because that way you can take all the advantages that you need. But first of all, let me first of all thank the Arab Council for the invitation that was extended to me, but I believe it wasn't just being extended to me, it was being extended to the African social science and humanities community, for which I represent in my role as Executive Secretary of CODESRIA. CODESRIA is 50 years old this year. So we've been around for quite some time, and we've been organizing as a community of scholarship for all those years. Of course, with the advantage of having been started by a range of senior academics, including Samir Amin, of course, together with others. And part of the reason for the founding of CODESRIA was a troubling situation that developed in the early 1970s, in which for African scholars to meet and have a discussion about things that were important for Africa, they would have to fly to the global north, to Bellagio, and many other places for the study of Africa, places where it was assumed the authority of serious scientific, rigorous knowledge could be found. So the dilemma of having to leave Africa to go and find authority about Africa abroad is in fact what led to the founding of CODESRIA in 1973. So we've had a community of scholarship that has been thinking about and theorizing not just about Africa, but actually about the global South in general. It will be remembered that in the 1960s and 1970s, the level of theorizing around the experience of the periphery, as it was called, in the context of the underdevelopment perspectives, was a concern not about the experience of Africa as a periphery, but the experience of the global South as peripheries. And the center, therefore, became the target of a whole range of analysis around questions of underdevelopment, questions of uneven development and unequal development. That in 1973 and before, there was a consciousness of systems of thinking that brought together academics from Latin America, from the Arab world, from India. Those days, China wasn't what it is today, to think about the experiences of people in this side of the world. For me, demonstrates that, in fact, we have to begin to explain why we are still thinking about theorizing from the global South in a prospective attitude, when in fact, this should be a taken for granted, if you will, experience. How come that without the benefit of technology, without the benefit of mobility that we enjoy now in the 1960s and 1970s, the founders of institutions like CODESRIA, the founders of institutions like Clarkson, understood that there was a need to develop a system of thinking about our experiences as contrasted to the global North, in a way that perhaps was a little more developed than we are experiencing today. And I think that what that means to me, therefore, is that to underscore the point that all the initiatives that have happened around the development of systems of thinking that speak to the experiences of the global South were cast in a system of taking on the project of decolonization, changing the systems of university systems, attempting to Africanize in the context of Africa, the civil service, establishing institutions of higher learning that were geared towards developing a nationalist orientation. And in many cases, and again, this the second question that I put at the table, there was a deliberate attempt for a system of thinking that connected, if you will, Pan-Arabism and Pan-Africanism. So that I was listening to a presentation yesterday where the different dots of the connection between the Arab world and the African world could be found in any country in Southern Africa. I think you are the one who made a presentation yesterday about this. You walk in Kenya, Zambia, Lusaka, you go to Guinea, Senegal, you find there is a visible connection between the experiences of the Arab world and the experiences of the African world, and schools of thought that developed in those days that spoke to a desire not just to be national in orientation, but a Pan-African and global in orientation, using the global South as the starting point for reflections about the experiences of ordinary people. The challenge that I have thought about was that in more ways than one, I think we tended to be reactive. Now, there's nothing wrong in being reactive. I think that after decades of colonialism, the attempt to fight against colonialism and all that, it made sense for Africa in particular in this case to redefine themselves, to find their humanity, because their humanity had been the subject of consistent doubt for centuries. And the idea that Africans were thinking for themselves were often frowned upon, partly because it was argued, and it's true for the Arab world, it was argued that Africa, Asia, and the Arab world are too important to be left to Africans, Arabs, and Asians. It's just too important. So centers of learning about Africa, centers of learning about the Arab world were established. And in the case of Africa, we had to take this sojourn into the global north in order to be trained about our own societies. So we tended to be reactive, understandably. But has that put us in a situation where we are not proactive in terms of theorizing our own experiences, using our own concepts, using our own methodologies, using the kinds of questions that we feel we need to ask about our own societies? Has that agenda been detained by the very fact that we are being reactive? And I think the situation is even worse when you begin to consider about the nature of Western knowledge about the world and about the African continent, the Arab world. It's worse partly because in its very orientation, Western knowledge has cast itself as universalist. It's the universal knowledge. You want to know, you have to rely on concepts developed out there. You want to know, you have to rely on methodologies developed there. And I feel that there are three things that have come to sort of lock us in away from actually theorizing from the South, one of which is the authority that Western forms of knowledge do carry. They have the capacity to authorize what is valid knowledge and what is not valid knowledge. In a sense, developing a self-deprecating attitude about ourselves when we talk about our own experiences. It has the infrastructure that legitimizes what pretends to be universal knowledge. And that infrastructure assures visibility, it assures hegemony, it assures dominance, and it has a very long-term approach to what it wants to do. And I think most importantly, it has networks. Networks that can be found in associations that frame what Africa is, what the Arab world is, and they frame it even for us. They have networks of publishing houses that are more legitimate, quote unquote. It has a old boys network. A lot of universalist Western knowledge begins from a very patriarchal orientation before it veers into other areas. And that the capacity to divide, the capacity to co-opt and silence, and the capacity to reward are built into a system that therefore makes it very difficult for us to begin to do what we need to do in terms of theorizing from the South. So that level of omnipotence and omnipresence of the universalist knowledge has remained something that traps us into debates that do not advance our capacity to theorize about ourselves from our own standpoint. It's essentially a form of knowledge that aims ultimately to define us and to remind us that we cannot operate without it. And for too long, I think we have been, so that you check the colonial library, it perverts many of the perspectives that we carry. It intrudes even when we are trying to deploy indigenous systems of knowledge to begin to talk about our own experiences. If you look at the historical memory, it's that. So that the general tendency is a tendency towards extraversion, as the philosopher from Benin, Polan Utonji, argues. And there are all forms of epistemic injustices, therefore, that are built into this system. Our capacity to defy is counterchecked at every point for reasons that we can discuss. Our own theories, therefore, are simply an add-on. Our attempts to disrupt these forms of knowledge constitute merely tinkering on the edges of what we really are thinking of. So the result for me is that we need an intellectual insurgency. We need an intellectual insurgency. It's not enough for Codesria to mount an intellectual insurgency against forms of knowledge that have a universalist orientation, even if that universalist orientation takes away from our humanity. Codesria will do its thing in Dakar and in a few countries in Africa, but that really would not disrupt the overall structure of hegemony that we need to disrupt. So that tinkering, reforming, is what we have been doing, but we need to go beyond those to a complete transformation in the nature of how we conduct our business and where we want to go. So yes, projects of introversion, us talking to ourselves and thinking about our experiences in ways that are comparative, in ways that are scientific, but also in ways that remember that there is no society in the world, there's no country in the world that has ever developed, had a sense of dignity about itself on the basis of knowledge produced for it by others. I think should be a guiding principle that we need to deploy in order for us to begin to think through the challenges that we are facing. And I think that that project of insurgency has to displace and disrupt in ways perhaps that we have not attempted before. It is something that I could read Edward Said's Orientalism and see a lot of sense in what he was describing based on my own experience in Africa. But we do not have similar canonical texts that would inform the experiences of other places. So what is it that we can do at a comparative level to make sure that the pillars for a very disruptive process of intellectual insurgency begin? And for me, and I want perhaps to conclude on this particular point, for me, there is no better place for us to share this message than in a conference like this one. Africa and the Arab world are lucky to share North Africa. And that the systems of knowledge that are the markers of the great civilizations of the world are located in the area that traverses the Sahara Desert. And we have for too long accepted the assumption that the Saharan Desert was a point of departure for North Africa and the rest of Africa. Our project disrupt that assumption of division, I think, is the central core of what I would say sits at the heart of the basics, the pillars for theorizing from the South. And I don't say this to say that Claxo isn't helpful to us. I think that there is a long history of engagement between systems of thought in Africa and systems of thought in Latin America. Some of them with well-established bases that we have discussed in many, many forums. So the point I'm just mobilizing here is that in this intellectual insurgency, not only do we need to rethink concepts, we need to displace what one would call the colonial library. So systems of thought that are non-Europhone, excuse my choice of word there, would be useful in terms of building pillars for a new system of thinking that is transnational. But also methodologies that begin to inform this particular process would be totally useful in terms of what is methodology other than the capacity to collect data from the lived experiences of people and discipline it in order for it to speak to the to relevance and needs of the people about whom you are writing about. But also building bridges across geographies and between people is central to this. That's why I'm taking the example of the Sahara Desert as a point of connection rather than a point of departure. If we can do some of these things, I feel that we will begin to construct a long-term basis against which we can build systems of thinking that, at least in the first instance, connect the Arab experience and the African experience. And they have the capacity to tell a much bigger story, a much more powerful story, I believe, than what we have been able to do so far. I will stop there in the interest of time and then hand over to him.
Thank you so much, Godwin. You've given us a lot to think about and a lot to not just think about, but to act upon, actually. So both a plan of action and a plan of thinking that you are proposing. I move to Karina again. So sorry that you are not with us here in Beirut. You did come to the 2019 conference, so we have seen you here in Beirut. But the floor is yours now for 15 minutes, please. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Seteni. Hello, everybody, and thanks, obviously, for the invitation, and I'm really sorry for not being there. Special thanks to Seteni and to the Arab Council for including Claxo in this conference. And hello also to Godwin Murunga from Codesria, and to the other panelists. Yes, I will try to address in 15 minutes the questions that was set for this panel. I will start with the question, what and where is the Global South, and if regions, do regions still matter? So then I will go to the idea of theorizing from the South, and also to the implications, not only for research and publication, but also for our institutional practice that we are carry on in Claxo, Codesria, and the Arab Council. So let's start with what we understand for South-South, for the Global South, and especially for the South-South idea of cooperation. As you obviously know, South-South cooperation is a form of collaboration and exchange between the countries in the Global South that involves the sharing of research, knowledge, and experience among what the so-called developing countries to promote economic, social, and political development. South-South cooperation obviously is based on the principle of solidarity, equality, and mutual benefit. And these principles are key issues for us, Claxo. This kind of cooperation recognizes that countries in the global south have common development goals and can learn from each other experience and from each other best practice. It also offers an alternative to the traditional North-South relation that obviously have been often characterized by unequal power dynamics and dependency. This kind of cooperation can take different forms, including bilateral agreements, regional initiatives, and multilateral platforms. And obviously, we see this kind of cooperation in many different areas. Now, today we are talking about research, training, social science, and so on. What about the idea of theorizing from the South? This is a concept that is related with the field of South-South cooperation, and that also emerged from the field of post-colonial, what is named post-colonial studies, and refers to the development of theoretical frameworks and perspectives that challenge the dominant Western epistemologies and perspectives. This also encouraged scholars from the global South to produce knowledge and to produce theories that are related in their own context, experience, and histories, rather than relying only on Western theories and framework. And this is, for me, one of the crucial issues that we have to address when we speak or we talk about theorizing from the South. This idea of theorizing from the South also recognizes that traditional theories and knowledge production have often been Eurocentric and based towards the experience and concerns of the global North. It seeks to address this imbalance by emphasizing the importance of different voices, diverse voices and perspectives from the global South. The global South, as we know, refer to countries in different continents, obviously in the South, Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean, the Arab region, that have historically been colonized, marginalized, or economically disadvantaged. Theorizing from the South aims to challenge the universal claims of Western theories and acknowledge that knowledge is not neutral, but shaped by power dynamics and historical context. It also recognizes that different regions and cultures have unique ways of understanding and interpreting the world, and that these perspectives are equally valid and valuable. And this is also a principle that we don't have to forget when we work around this issue. By centering the experience and perspective of the global South, theorizing from the South seeks to decolonize knowledge productions and promote a more inclusive and diverse understanding of the world. It also encourages scholars to engage with local knowledge system, histories, and social realities, and to develop theories that are relevant and meaningful to their own communities. This challenge, this is one of the main challenges that we are facing nowadays in Latin America and the Caribbean concerning the global South knowledge. We have obviously some benefits when we talk about South-South cooperation, and also when we talk about this idea of theorizing from the South. The first one is the possibility to share experience. Then we also have as a benefit the idea of solidarity and political empowerment. Also, the idea of knowledge exchange between the South-South knowledge exchange. Overall, the South-South cooperation offers a platform for developing countries to collaborate, learn from each other, and work together towards their shared development goals. It promotes a more equitable and inclusive global order by fostering self-reliance, solidarity, and mutual support among countries in the global South. We here in Latin America and the Caribbean are currently facing a series of crossroads that are complex to solve. We have the scandalous inequality that prevails, the disaster caused by the pandemic, by the COVID-19 pandemic, the environmental crisis, and also geopolitical tensions that make up a scenario of simultaneous and escalating conflicts. Latin America, as you know, is the most unequal region in the world, where the richest 20% of the population accounts for around 56% of the total income. It was also the region most affected by the pandemic, with only 9% of the population. Latin America and the Caribbean suffered 33% of the deaths from COVID-19 worldwide. And also, as a result of the pandemic, it was the region with the strongest economic contraction. In 2020, 7% was this contraction, for which 22 million people have fallen below the poverty line in the region, and we returned to 2008 levels. That's why we talk that we lost more than 10 years in this fight against poverty. If we see the latest UNDP Human Development Report, the Latin America and the Caribbean region is trapped in a double trap of persistently high inequality and low growth, from which it can only emerge through structural change accompanied by universalization of their social protection system. In our region, we have not yet managed to build effectively universal, sustainable, and comprehensive social protection systems. We are really in a struggle point concerning inequalities. But we also have to put on the table that the countries of the South have contributed in the last year to more than half of the world growth in recent years, and also that intra-South trade is higher than ever, accounting for more than a quarter of all world trade. So we need to strengthen this idea of South-South interchange, cooperation, solidarity, and Claxo is trying to develop and strengthen the South-South programs, obviously in our field of competence, that is to say, in training, in research, in communication, and also in scientific evaluation and knowledge evaluation. We have several examples and good practice with CODERRIA and with the Arab Council of Social Science. I will not tell all these examples here because of time constraints. We have now, the Global South has now various social science challenges. This challenge can arise from historical, political, economical, and cultural factors. I will only name some key social science challenges for the Global South. The first one is poverty and inequality. I think that it is not necessary to explain why I include poverty and inequalities as one of the main issues for the Global South. The second one is governance and corruptions. The different governance structures, the political instability, and widespread corruption obviously pose significant challenge for the Global South. Social scientists, we are faced to analyze and describe this power institution, this corruption network, as well as the implication that all this has for social relations and for social justice. Also, the third challenge is conflict and post-conflict reconstruction. This refers to all the armed conflicts that we can see in the global south that obviously generate consequences for all our society. Then in the fourth place, social movements and activism. We also have in the global south a great experience in activism and social movement. The global south has been really an issue in this concerning social movement and activism. For instance, all the movement around women's rights, environmental movement, indigenous rights, and so on. So we as social science, we have to examine this dynamic of this movement. We have to work together with this movement, work with their goals, strategies, and the challenge they face, obviously in advocating for social science. Then in the fifth place, there is also a challenge concerning cultural identity and diversity. The global south is characterized by rich cultural diversity, including different dimensions: indigenous population, ethnic minorities, women's rights, as I said before. And we as social science have to explore this issue and also propose how to work together with this, including this cultural identity and diversity. Then we have also a challenge with migration and urbanization. Migration, especially migration and human mobility in Latin America, is at this moment a crucial issue. Then we have also all the challenge related to health disparities. I think it is not necessary to explain this point. After the pandemic, we can we can imagine rapidly what I'm talking about when I say health disparities. Then we also have a challenge around education in the global south. That refers to the access to quality education, also especially is the possibility to develop social science at the universities, at the different educational systems. Then we have another challenge that is related to climate change and environmental sustainability. Obviously, this is not only a challenge for the global south, but the global south is suffering the consequences in a different magnitude than the global north. Last but not least, we have all the issues related to gender inequality and women's rights in the global south. This is a main issue for the global south, and this is also a main issue for Claxo, that is working around gender inequality in Latin America and the Caribbean. So what I want to say to conclude, is that we need to address this social science challenge. We need to address this with an interdisciplinary research, with collaboration, and obviously integrating local knowledge and perspective. We need to develop this kind of research, training, and communication from the social science, from a social science point of view, in order to develop further the idea of global south and social science cooperation in the global south. Thank you very much.
Rina for this rich intellectual menu and for these ideas and very actionable ideas. I move to, I hope you can stay with us for the discussion. Yes, perfect. I move to my colleague, Dries Xikas. 15 minutes, please, Dries.
Thank you. Thanks a lot to SCSS for the invitation. Theorizing from the South. Which South? From where are we talking? I personally talk from North Africa, which is entangled in an ambiguous position of ex-empire, disconnected from sub-Saharan Africa, and ex-colony, which is taken from, which is today trying to find a place within this global South, while being part of decolonial geo-epistemic configurations. This, my part of the world is taken from the West as part of Middle East, while it is the far West of Islam. And at the same time, the South, when we, but if the Orient is an exotic category from an Orientalist point of view, the South is mainly an underdeveloped land from northern institutions' point of view. Unfortunately, even thinkers from the South have sometimes reproduced this presupposed idea. Abdullah Al-Harwi, for example, talks about retard culturel. This is helped me just ground my intervention in my feeling that place is not a neutral category, but also is something that is biased by all the representations that are behind. And when we're talking about this question of the South as an underdeveloped land, this makes us think about the idea brought by traveling theories that consider the South as subsidiary. And the challenge is to move from this perception to grounded understanding of our place as part of what Edouard Glissant calls a tout monde, which means that it is an unhierarchical relation to the world. And from this perspective, become co-producers of knowledge. So that's where lies the question theorizing from the South, from where I'm speaking. And of course, I will ground my intervention on my own experience, but also from different interactions and readings I came out with. And I suggest three possible pathways that may help us think this big question of theorizing from the South. My three questions are like this. The first one is reshuffling epistemic heritage and practices. The second one is rethinking categories through grounded research. And the third one is assuming translation as a paradigm. Let's start by the issue of reshaping knowledge, production, genealogies, and practices. Here it is very helpful to distinguish whether we are talking from a post-empire or post-colony point of view, because this has to do with the use we are making of these genealogies. From a post-empire northern point of view, it helps at the most deconstruct Eurocentric, logocentric intellectual lineages, and as Bashir Diani says, lateralize the universal. or as Khatibi says, pluralize it. But from a post-colony point of view, this means strike the balance in terms of epistemic justice, fight against epistemicide, give voice to unheard narratives, images, archives that even post-independent states and elites kept silent or invisible. When I look at existing, and by the way, kept the same even by our universities as institutions, when I look at existing works that try to go in that direction, I think that I think that we have, that we have there's two philosophers, yes, that can help us. And I'm thinking about the Senegalese phenomenologist Badondoy, in dialogue with Husserl and Paulin Houtangi, in an attempt to go beyond essentialist positions in ethnophilosophy, and that recalls positions held by other Southern post-colonial scholars, is that, and I quote here Badondoy, philosophical thinking takes its starting point not from representations of the world, as established in the name of Eurocentric universal canon, and by a whole genealogy of Western thinkers, but from the problems as they are rising in the real world we live in. This means, in his sense, not taking the universal as a pre-established norm, but as an infinite task, to accomplish from where we are. But while this reinvention of the universal from our localities seems self-evident, our institutional configurations show that they have to be all the time renegotiated. Let me, in this sense, recall a story when European Union decided in the aftermath of 2011 fever to fund plenty of research about youth, generational transition, and all that has to do with agency and activism in the region. Our research center was supposed to take care of Morocco along with other partners from Algeria, Tunisia, Egypt, Lebanon, in a project called, in a very fashionable way, Sahwa. That came out to be the acronym of the project. Very, we had to negotiate with our northern partners from Spain, England, and Germany, that the categories, the theoretical framework, and conceptual papers supposed to predetermine the fieldwork and later analyze the main findings have to be co-designed, thought about critically, and not consider us as Southern informants, but also think the outcome in a way that help us in our self-reflexive work on our own societies. So from this dialogic negotiation point of view, my feeling is that we still have to fight to be in a more comfortable position to negotiate our responsibility in widening the scope of theory. Because most of the time, our own institutions and scholars accept the existing international division of labor in the name of globalized neoliberal norms of assessment of universities, which is a way of proletarizing research and not taking seriously our take in the theoretical endeavor. My second point, my second pathway is rethinking categories through new research directions and grounded research. Don't get me wrong from what I was saying. I'm not making a hierarchy between theory and empirical work. But I am considering that our capacity of mixing both is still limited not only by our own capacities, but also by political and institutional constraints. But that is why gaining our place in this epistemic battle, and I call it epistemic battle, depends on our capacity of transforming marginal empirical work rereading of minor literature in the sense given by Deleuze, but also uncovered and alternative archives as a way of contextualizing theory, as a possibility to draw new categories of thinking through renewed understanding of race, class, space, to quote Badis, as a way of producing immanent, grounded theories. This is what the Algerian philosopher Salwa Lusbulbina is doing through her empirical philosophical approach. She's taken artistic and literary works of Katib Yassin and Qadr Atiyah, for example, as unpredicted revealers of new insights for thinking, self and otherness and language. And here again, I would like to recall another experience of transnational research on media with an Oxford scholar as leader and researchers from Tunisia, Morocco, Tunisia, and Turkey. We were involved in a research to understand media political, economic, and social configurations in our 3 countries, with the ambition to develop a new theoretical framework grounded in South Mediterranean fieldwork. Because so far, and this is very important to know, the model through which the region was analyzed by scholars was either borrowed from late 19th century France and Italy, or from post-Soviet Union, Western Europe. Here again, we see that the initiative of rethinking the theory while considering the empirical work as the basis came from the North, and even the results not invested since the publication is out of reach. Which drives me to my second lesson: let's rethink the chain of value of research production when it comes to grounded theory in a way that goes back to our Southern institutions and young scholars. My third pathway is assuming translation as a paradigm. When I worked on Ibn Rushd in order to write a novel, I was not interested in history as much as I was interested in the effects of his becoming Averroes during 6 centuries, and the impossible reincorporation of his rational thinking in his Maghrebi space after most of his lost books were retranslated in Arabic, starting from 19th century. Beyond name transformation from Ibn Rushd to Averroes by University of Paris, what struck me is the impossible reappropriation of his theoretical heritage, because reduced by Renan as mere commentator and considered lately by Muhammad Abdu as a Latinized, Christianized Arab philosopher. While I was trying to investigate his contemporary legacy in Morocco, I found out that his tomb in Marrakesh, where he was buried for 3 months, became the post-mortem dwell of a mystic figure, who is still buried today. I understood how much the philosophical translation is flawed by omnipresence of mysticism in society. Here, what I'm trying to say is that in my sense, the importance of translation as a paradigm makes us think how we can pluralize logos in the 2 senses, logics and language, in our society. This is exactly the direction taken by philosophers like Barbara Cassin, Abdeslam Ibn Abdel Ali, or Bashir Diani, who try to do a double deconstruction. The first one has to do with Babylizing the world, and the second one is otherizing, alterizing the local. Our capacity to avoid monolithic thinking and assuming our hybrid in-between position with languages of the world, but also with the plural heritage within our spaces, Amazigh, Darija, Hassani, nomadic cultures, is not only a matter of lexical transfer, but that of refounding, a way of looking at categories, sciences, disciplines, and important ways of classifying space, taste, beauty, through narratives, representation practices, but also through unknown naming. I was just listening a moment ago to the brilliant presentation by my friend Stefania Pandolfo, and how the naming from the vernacular and classical traditional culture is trying to help us deconstruct the understanding of imported Western categories in relation with psychiatry and psychoanalysis. Theorizing is above all a matter of renaming, proposing new or reinvented names that take the flavor of different localities, like Ubuntu or Hudud, densifying sense to consider complex issues related to various aspects of our daily life: identity, patriarchy, state violence, social relations, etc., etc. Of course, this entails a huge amount of serendipity, of decentering from established and disciplinary ways of doing research. This means at the end, rethinking the role of our Southern institutions in defining time, locality, agenda, and we just heard a whole set of issues on the agenda and methodology and modalities of research. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dries. Just as a very perhaps trite note, it is not lost on us that in order to talk to each other across our experiences, we have to speak in English. And, you know, the implications of that are obviously profound on our dialogue. So thank you. And I move now. Time management has not been very effective, but self-regulation. However, I think Fadi will have some time to give us some thoughts. And of course, he did not have the benefit of the texts or the presentations. So he has an interesting task to share with us some reflections on what we just heard. So thank you. Go ahead, Fadi.
Thank you, Satani. Thank you for all the speakers. It's a tall order to follow. I'm going to say a few words in the beginning to answer the main question that was given to us, which is to what extent is Theorizing from the South carrying out its promise of developing new emancipatory academic practices and vocabulary. The key words here are, for me, South, emancipation, and practice. What do we mean when we say we're theorizing from the South? Do we consider it to be a geographical location, an institutional one, a cultural one, or an epistemic one? We've heard all of the above in the past presentations. I think it's worth pausing and considering the different ways in which the question of the South relate to questions which are related by an understanding of an asymmetry in power between North and South, yet analytically distinct. Is producing work in the liberal tradition, whether in philosophy or in the social sciences, from the South, considered theorizing from the South in the same way as thinking from the ground of non-Western intellectual traditions? But also when we think about the question of emancipatory academic practices, not only vocabularies, one of the issues that comes to mind is whether the question of theorizing from the South is not only a matter of always engaging with the Western tradition, either to fill a gap in Western theory, to render it unfamiliar so that what's taken for granted is no longer taken so, or to actually show that there are alternative ways of being in the world that are not offered by the Western theory. This is all very important, but when we think about practices and institutions, what is at stake is also the questions where thought should take place. I mean, Dries touched on that briefly, and I think it's a very important question. If thought should take place in the university as an institution, should the universities in the global South look like the ones in the global North, with the same disciplines, the same way of organizing knowledges, and the same canons? Or should the institution itself be transformed? Is there a need, for instance, to produce a canon of critical theory from the South? Or is the idea of the canon itself one that should be put into question? Do we need a museum of Arab cultures, of African cultures, or is the idea of the museum itself one that should be put into questions? Do we need new departments, new disciplines, like the one called Langue, Littérature et Civilisation Africaine, which was founded at the Université of Gaston Berger in Senegal, which literally sort of introduces itself as a department that in French says tient à l'africanité comme l'une de ses principales marques. Il s'agit notamment de donner aux enseignements théoriques et pratiques un contenu et une dimension suffisamment africain en vue de l'enrichissement, de la promotion et de la protection de la diversité culturelle. It's a global South agenda in terms of thinking about the wealth, the richness of African points of view. And it ends by saying, while keeping all of these activities open to the preoccupations of Senegal, Africa, and the world. And I read this description of that discipline, that department at the Université Gaston Berger, to point to something that in our moment, in a way, recapitulates the earlier moments of the 70s, but is different from it, and I'll come back to it. It recapitulates it in, for example, the presentation that Alwar Labidi gave in this conference, where she said that sort of Tunisian nationalism was interested in sort of affirming itself while also affirming remaining open to the world. And we see this sort of this tension between self and the world, between basically how to affirm yourself without actually fall back onto a certain parochial nationalism or chauvinism, is a tension that's still with us, that we're still trying to think from the South in itself, the self and the world. I would not say the other. Then there are all the questions which have to do with the fraught question of emancipation. Where does emancipation lie and how to achieve it? The last point has to do with the question of theory. In a very interesting article a while ago, Partho Chatterjee said that the very distinguished Indian historian Shahid Amin lamented the fact that thick histories or thick ethnographies even do not travel as well as theory. So what happens when we actually constrain critical knowledge production to theory? Because theory itself, through its powers of conceptual subsumption, through its abstraction, can circulate faster, wider, reach wider audiences. And the question really, I think, is one of critical knowledges in the global South. This is another point that sort of Dries touched on, which does not necessarily take the form of abstract theory. Now, I put this question of theory on the table for the question of theory, critique, and emancipation on the table for several reasons. One is because precisely critical knowledge production could take the form of art or could take the form of other sort of forms of disclosure on our society. But second, because it sort of, I think, resonates with a major point that was made in our first keynote by Yassin Al-Haj Saleh of how theory itself can act as basically something that covers up as opposed to discloses, something that could be in the service of power through the rationalizations that were put to basically erase the violence that was made to Syrians during the Syrian revolutions. And the third thing is, I think, interesting, is to actually think the question of the potentialities to bring newness into the world. I will now sort of move to the second section, which is about my questions to what we just heard. And again, as I said, it's a tall order. One of the sort of interesting points that Godwin made, which resonated very much with me, is that it seemed to me as if he's sort of appropriating some of the vocabulary of the Arab Spring in Arab revolutions, not spring, in his sort of in his talk when he said that to produce basically our theories is an act of dignity, and that act of dignity itself is an act of intellectual insurgency. And I think that question of dignity when it comes to sort of knowledge production is worth putting on the table as a question that has a long genealogy itself. But it also opens another can of worms, which is, does our knowledge of ourselves mean that it has to basically take place with concepts that come exclusively from our societies or not? i.e., does the act of dignity entail, drawing only on the resources of our indigenous knowledges? Or to put the question in another way, and it's a big question to all panelists, does the origin of a concept predetermine its validity or not, or overdetermine even its validity or not? These are very, very, I think, big questions that people are struggling with, and they have been struggling with in the 70s. There was a big conference in the late 70s, early 80s called Anthropology in the Non-Western World, and the conference, the invitees of the conference were divided. Some of them said, as a part of as part of our decolonization, we need an indigenous anthropology. We can no longer basically use concepts that were produced by Western anthropology. This is the time when anthropology was called the child of imperialism, the handmaiden of colonialism, et cetera, et cetera. Someone like Talal Asad, who commented on this conference, said that he doesn't think that basically it's a good idea to actually think that there is one anthropology called Western anthropology, and the equivalent to it should be a non-Western anthropology. Rather, one should seek to actually do another kind of action, which is to study these Western societies anthropologically, i.e., to reverse the gaze and to take those people who sort of saw that they could sort of literally understand these societies and frame them as other, and as so not only as other, but as others, and as sort of, between brackets, sort of backwards, to actually return that gaze and to actually subject modernity itself. Instead of modernity being the ground from which analysis rests, modernity itself becomes an object of anthropological inquiry, and in that it's provincialized, and that it's sort of deconstructed, and its authority undermined. So these are sort of, what I'm trying to say is that these are different ways in which one can think that question. In Karina's very interesting conversation as well, there was, in the three, but mostly in Karina, there was a sort of a drawing on a political conceptual language, which is a concept which was associated with third world internationalism, solidarity, political empowerment, etc. And my question to the three panelists would be is that in what ways are the questions of South-South collaborations thought through as the intellectual equivalent of an economic or political delinking, so to speak? And last, I come to the sort of big question that Seteni asked about, North-South versus East-West. When we think about the South, to what extent are we still trying to displace the West and not the North? Because when we sort of center experience, like Godwin did, and I'm a complete improvement, I approve with the centering of experience. It's something that Yassin Haj Saleh tried to do as well in his keynote. When we center experience, and when we think about our knowledges, our cultures, we sort of tend to fall back on the question of the South as a non-West. Or in other words, where would Japan and China be in that equation? Japan, obviously, if we're thinking about the question of capital, is in the global North. But if we're thinking in terms of sort of Japanese sort of non-Western knowledges, it falls in a different place. So is Japan our ally in thinking about sort of non-Western knowledges, or is Japan basically part of the sort of capitalist world that is, in a way, part of hegemony? So this is an old question, I think, that goes back to the moment of decolonization, where the question of difference was articulated on two different axes. One was a historicist axis of stagism, which Dries alluded to in La'arwi, who's our sort of most eminent historicist. So basically, you rank societies. There are backward societies, there are first world, second world, third world. But the other way of articulating difference was cultural. Another way of sort of thinking about these two legacies is through thinking through the difference between the legacies of the social sciences and the humanities. The social sciences were interested in development, interested in stagism, etc., while the humanities thought more about the question of plurality, which basically now people are trying to sort of come back to. Yet at that point also there was a question of cultural inferiority, cultural superiority, etc. So if we think about these sort of two axes of difference, whether it's the stagist historicist one or the cultural one, we get a different rendering of the North-South relationship. Obviously, the East-West one would correspond to culture when it comes to sort of Arabic intellectuals, but the question of the third world would come differently. I mean, it's not only about Japan and China, but if we think about the Arab world itself, where would sort of, oil-rich Arab countries fall? Is the Gulf part of the global South or not? Is it halfway through the global South when it comes to capital, not when it comes to culture? No, these are very important questions I think we need to address. And I will stop here. Thank you so much for these great conversations.
Thank you so much, Paddy. Thank you so much for the whole panel. I have a very difficult decision because we only have 4 minutes left. We started late, so it's not that people really exceeded their time limit. We started late. I just want to say that to all of you who are with us in this conference, that these are the real questions for the Arab Council for the Social Science. I mean, we talk about programs, we talk about modalities, we have working groups on this, and we have grant programs on that, and so on. But really, in the background and the foreground, we are tackling these huge issues that are not just intellectual exercises, as I think everyone has explained very well and expressed very well. These are questions that affect and shape our everyday lives, as well as what we call our professional lives. And so these are the questions that the Arab Council for Social Sciences is really here for. And it cannot do it alone. I think everyone has expressed that this thinking has to be done together. It has to be done through dialogue, through disagreement, through insurgency, through collaboration. And so the challenges are huge. At the same time, I feel optimistic that we can have this discussion here in Beirut rather than in New York or in Paris or in Vienna or wherever, and that we can seek not answers, that wouldn't be the right way to put it, that we seek pathways together. I would rather, if you do not get angry at me, I would rather close the panel right now, leave us with these questions hanging. And once again, thank you and thank our speakers.